General Vesker of the Pralax Dominion sat in his towering command chair, his bony digits clicking against one another in a rhythm that conveyed equal parts boredom and disdain. The holographic display before him illuminated the war table, where a dozen other alien generals floated as shimmering projections. They were an eclectic mix of species, from the gas-like Ziverins to the crystalline Garlites, yet they all shared one sentiment: humanity was a joke. Our scouts intercepted their combat manual, scoffed General Zuval, his translucent carapace refracting rainbow light as he gestured toward the data scrolling past on the holo display. These humans rely on projectile weapons, prone to jamming and close-quarter melee tactics. Barbaric. General Vesker let out a low rumble of amusement, his vertical mouth opening to reveal rows of gleaming teeth. They are primitives, like hatchlings trying to play a game they do not understand. Why the Vexorian coalition even considers them a threat is beyond me. They're stubborn. That's all, chimed in General Galthar, the gelatinous commander of the Osmar Collective. It's like trying to exterminate a pest that doesn't realize it's already dead. As the generals mocked and dissected humanity's supposed inadequacies, Captain Darian Locke of the United Earth Command stood quietly in the corner of the war room, hands clasped behind his back. His presence was a mere diplomatic courtesy. The Pralax Dominion had graciously invited him to observe their strategic deliberations, which had quickly devolved into an interstellar roast of his species. Locke's expression remained stoic, but his blue-gray eyes flicked toward the tactical readout. The aliens were reviewing footage of Earth's past wars, most notably from the 20th and 21st centuries. Grainy videos of trench warfare, chaotic tank battles, and desperate urban combat played on repeat. The alien commanders cackled. They charge at each other with such inefficient formations, Vesker said, jabbing a talon at the screen. No coordinated phalanx, no massed plasma formations. Instead, they scatter like prey animals in a stampede. Locke finally broke his silence, his voice calm but firm. Perhaps you misunderstand the purpose of our tactics. Vesker turned toward him, his slit pupil eyes narrowing. And what purpose would that be, human? Chaos? Inefficiency? Suicide? Locke allowed himself a faint smile. Survival. The room erupted in laughter. Vesker leaned forward, towering over Locke even in holographic form. Survival is what lesser species cling to when they lack the skill to achieve victory. You humans have not evolved past desperation. Locke tilted his head, his smile unwavering. Desperation is a tool, General. One we wield with precision. The Pralax general snorted and waved dismissively. Enough of this. We waste time analyzing the flailings of an insignificant race. Our fleets will descend upon your colonies tomorrow, and this war will be over before your kind even understands it has begun. Locke bowed his head politely. We'll see. As the meeting concluded, the generals logged off one by one, leaving Vesker and Locke alone in the war room. The Pralax commander studied the human with a mix of amusement and curiosity. You're either incredibly brave or incredibly foolish, Captain. Possibly both, Locke replied, turning to leave. The following day, the Pralax Dominion launched their offensive. Vast fleets of warships, bristling with plasma cannons and gravitic disruptors, surged toward humanity's outer colonies. Vesker watched from the bridge of his flagship, confident in the inevitability of his victory. Targeting arrays locked on, his weapons officer reported. The humans' defenses are laughably sparse. Indeed, the colonies seemed woefully underprepared. A few orbital defense platforms fired sporadic bursts, but their energy output barely registered against the Dominion's shields. The alien commanders were already congratulating themselves when a blaring alarm cut through the bridge. Contact at starboard. Vesker turned, his eyes narrowing as he saw a swarm of human ships emerging from the shadow of a nearby moon. They weren't traditional warships, but a ragtag fleet of retrofitted cargo freighters, mining vessels, and even passenger liners. What is this? Vesker growled. There, ramming us. The human ships surged forward with reckless abandon, colliding with the Dominion fleet in a cacophony of fire and debris. Explosions rippled across the battlefield as the humans turned their own ships into improvised weapons. Insane, muttered Vesker. No species would sacrifice so much for so little gain. But then, something unexpected happened. Amid the chaos, human boarding parties began to breach the Dominion ships. Vesker's comms crackled with panicked reports. General, they're using grappling hooks and cutting tools. They've breached Deck 7. Repel them, Vesker barked. On board the Parallax ships, the human soldiers fought like cornered wolves. They wielded primitive ballistic weapons and crude melee tools, yet their ferocity was unmatched. They moved in unpredictable patterns, exploiting every weakness in the ship's layout. One Parallax officer, cornered by a squad of humans, marveled at their adaptability. They improvise, as though they were born for chaos. On the colony's surface, the battle was no less chaotic. Parallax forces deployed mechanized walkers and energy-based artillery, expecting a quick rout of the human defenders. Instead, they encountered a battlefield littered with traps and improvised explosives. Captain Locke stood in the middle of the fray, barking orders to his troops. Spring the second line. Fall back to the choke points. The humans didn't fight to hold ground. Instead, they lured the Parallax forces into a labyrinth of kill zones, where every street and building became a potential death trap. They used everything at their disposal: civilian vehicles rigged with explosives, hacked drones as flying bombs, even kitchen appliances turned into weapons. One Parallax commander, observing the chaos from a ridge, shook his head in disbelief. They weaponize everything, even their terrain fights against us. Hours turned into days, and what should have been a swift conquest became a protracted nightmare. Vesker, now visibly agitated, paced the bridge of his flagship. General, his second in command, said hesitantly, "Our forces are reporting heavy casualties. The humans. They're unlike any enemy we faced." Vesker slammed his claws against the console. "Enough. Deploy the quantum annihilators. Wipe them off the map." But before the order could be carried out, a human transmission cut through the Dominion's comm channels. Captain Locke's face appeared, bloodied but unbowed. "General Vesker," Locke said, his tone deceptively casual. "Still think we're just primitives." Vesker bared his teeth. "You've only delayed the inevitable, human." Locke chuckled. "You don't get it, do you? This isn't just a fight for survival. It's a demonstration. You wanted to see how humans fight? Well, you're getting the full experience." The signal cut off, but Locke's words lingered. Vesker stared at the chaotic battlefield below, where his forces were being systematically dismantled by an enemy that defied all logic. For the first time in his long career, the Parallax general felt something unfamiliar: doubt. The Parallax fleet regrouped, hovering above the embattled human colony like vultures over a dying beast. General Vesker surveyed the scene with a scowl. Fires burned across the surface, casting flickering light into the darkness of space. Despite his fleet's overwhelming technological superiority, the human defenders had managed to hold their ground. It was infuriating. "Status report," Vesker barked. His second in command, a younger officer named Zorlin, consulted a glowing display. "Our ground forces are reporting heavy resistance. The humans have established fortifications in their urban centers. They're using guerrilla tactics to disrupt supply lines and sabotage our mechanized units." Vesker growled low in his throat. "Unacceptable. Deploy the purge walkers. Let us see how their primitive tools fare against Dominion engineering." Moments later, the purge walkers, a line of towering, spider-like machines bristling with plasma weaponry, descended to the planet's surface. These mechanical monstrosities were designed to break sieges and crush enemy morale. On the ground, Captain Locke watched the walkers approach through a pair of battered binoculars. His soldiers, dug into makeshift trenches and barricades, shifted nervously. "Steady," Locke said, his voice calm, despite the ominous sight. The first walker opened fire, vaporizing an entire building with a single blast. The earth trembled as the machines advanced, their metallic legs crushing everything in their path. "Sir," one of Locke's lieutenants said, her voice tight with fear, "our weapons can't pierce their armor." Locke lowered the binoculars, a faint smile tugging at his lips. "We're not going to pierce their armor. We're going to blind them." As the purge walkers moved deeper into the city, the humans sprang their trap. Teams of engineers, hidden in the rubble, used modified construction drones to drop reflective tarps over the walkers' optical sensors. At the same time, snipers armed with EMP rounds targeted their exposed control nodes. The result was chaos. Blinded and disoriented, the walkers began firing wildly, their plasma blasts carving through Parallax troops and machinery as much as human defenses. One walker toppled over entirely after stumbling into a pit lined with steel spikes. From a concealed position, Locke watched the carnage unfold. "It's not about how strong they are," he muttered to himself. "It's about how we make them use their strength against themselves." Up in orbit, Vesker was livid. "Blindfolded. They're being blindfolded like hatchlings," he roared, slamming a clawed fist onto the command console. "Zorlin, recall the walkers and launch the atmospheric fleet. Burn the humans out of their holes." Zorlin hesitated. "General, deploying the fleet at low altitude could leave us vulnerable to." "Do it," Vesker snapped. The atmospheric fleet descended, a swarm of sleek, black vessels bristling with weapons. They unleashed a withering barrage of plasma fire, leveling entire districts of the colony. To the Parallax, it seemed the tide had turned. But the humans had been preparing for this. As the alien ships closed in, clouds of smoke billowed from the ruins. At first, the Parallax dismissed it as the byproduct of their bombardment. Then the missiles came. Human engineers had spent days repurposing water treatment facilities, turning them into launch platforms for makeshift rockets. These missiles weren't high-tech, they were cobbled together from salvaged parts and filled with explosives scavenged from every conceivable source. But what they lacked in sophistication, they made up for in sheer audacity. The first wave of missiles struck the lower hulls of the atmospheric fleet, disabling shields and forcing the ships to retreat. Then came the second wave. This time, the humans targeted key structural points, causing several ships to crash spectacularly into the ground. One of Vesker's officers turned to him, his face pale. "General, we've lost 37 vessels in the last 10 minutes. How Vesker demanded. "They're throwing garbage at us." "It's not garbage," Zorlin murmured, watching the display with a mixture of horror and admiration. "It's ingenuity." Back on the ground, Locke's forces pressed their advantage. Using the wreckage of the downed ships as cover, they launched a counterattack, pushing the Parallax forces into retreat. Locke stood atop a pile of rubble, his uniform scorched and torn. He surveyed the battlefield, his mind already racing ahead to the next move. "Captain," a voice called out. It was Sergeant Reyes, one of his most trusted soldiers. "Reinforcements are inbound. They'll be here within the hour." Locke nodded. "Good. We'll need every hand we can get." Reyes hesitated, then added, "Sir, the aliens. They're not retreating. They're regrouping." Locke's jaw tightened. "Then we'll show them what humans can do when we're cornered." On the Dominion flagship, Vesker sat in silence, his claws tapping against the armrest of his chair. He had underestimated these humans. What should have been a simple conquest was turning into a protracted war of attrition. General Zorlin ventured cautiously, "Perhaps it's time to reconsider our approach. The humans." "The humans are insects," Vesker snapped. "They're only delaying the inevitable." "But what if they're not?" Zorlin pressed. "What if their tactics aren't random? What if this is all part of their strategy?" Vesker stared at him, his eyes narrowing. "You think these primitives have a strategy?" Zorlin hesitated, then nodded. "They fight like their survival depends on it. Every action they take is calculated to maximize the damage they inflict. They don't fight for victory, they fight to make victory as costly as possible for their enemies." For a moment, Vesker said nothing. Then he rose from his chair, his towering form casting a long shadow across the bridge. "If that's the case, then we'll crush their spirit. Prepare the orbital bombardment. We'll erase this colony from existence." Down on the surface, Locke's comms crackled to life. "Captain, we've intercepted their transmissions. They're preparing an orbital strike." Locke's expression darkened. "How long do we have?" "Minutes, at best." Locke nodded slowly, his mind racing. "Get me a link to command. We're going to need every ship they can spare." As his team scrambled to establish the connection, Locke looked toward the sky, where the Dominion fleet loomed like a storm cloud. "This isn't over," he muttered. The colony trembled under the shadow of the Dominion fleet, its weapons primed for orbital bombardment. On board his flagship, General Vesker watched impassively as his subordinates finalized targeting trajectories. "Wipe them out," Vesker ordered coldly. "If they refuse to kneel, we will burn the ground they stand on." From the surface, Captain Locke gazed skyward. The human defenses, though resilient, were woefully inadequate against an orbital strike. His fingers gripped the comm device as he barked into the mic. "Command, this is Locke. We need immediate reinforcements. If we don't disrupt that fleet, we'll lose everything." A response crackled through, a mix of static and urgency. "Acknowledged, Captain. The 12th Fleet is en route, ETA 15 minutes. "We don't have 15 minutes," Locke replied grimly. The first plasma barrage fell moments later. The ground quaked as blue-white energy seared through the atmosphere, striking defensive positions and civilian districts alike. Explosions sent shockwaves across the colony, shattering buildings and igniting fires that raged unchecked. But the humans refused to surrender. Even as the bombardment intensified, Locke's soldiers worked tirelessly to maintain communications and coordinate evacuation efforts. They moved civilians to underground shelters, using whatever remained of the colony's infrastructure to shield them from the onslaught. Locke himself directed a desperate countermeasure. "Rig the railguns for direct fire," he shouted. "Target their low-orbit ships." A lieutenant hesitated. "Sir, those guns aren't meant for that. The rails will overheat after a single shot." "Then we'll make that one shot count," Locke said, his voice steely. The railguns, designed for launching cargo into orbit, had been hastily retrofitted with warheads scavenged from downed Dominion craft. When the first railgun fired, the projectile streaked into the sky at hypersonic speed, striking a Parallax frigate dead center. The ship erupted in a fiery explosion, debris raining down onto the colony. Vesker, observing the destruction from his bridge, snarled, "How do they keep finding ways to hurt us?" Zorlin, ever the voice of reason, replied, "Because they refuse to play by the rules. Their tactics are unorthodox." "Unorthodox is a polite way of saying reckless," Vesker snapped. Zorlin didn't respond, but inwardly, he couldn't help but admire the human's ingenuity. Meanwhile, Locke was preparing for a new gambit. The Dominion fleet's movements were predictable, following precise orbital patterns. It was a strength but also a vulnerability. "Get me the engineers," Locke said, his mind working furiously. The engineers arrived, a ragtag group of mechanics and technicians covered in soot and grime. "What do you need, Captain?" Locke pointed to a schematic of the colony's remaining infrastructure. "Those coolant towers, they still operational." The chief engineer scratched his head. "Barely. Why?" "Because we're going to turn them into weapons," Locke replied. The plan was simple in concept but daring in execution. The coolant towers, massive structures designed to regulate industrial temperatures, would be overloaded to create localized electromagnetic pulses. If timed correctly, the pulses could disrupt the Dominion's targeting systems and force their fleet to reposition. It was a long shot, but Locke knew they had no other options. The Parallax fleet continued its relentless bombardment, but as the first EMP pulse surged from the coolant towers, chaos erupted among the Dominion ranks. "General, our targeting systems are offline," a technician shouted. Vesker's claws clenched. "How is that possible?" Localized MP, Zorlin said, his tone laced with reluctant admiration. "They've weaponized their own infrastructure." "Then adapt," Vesker roared. "Recalibrate manually if you must. I want that colony obliterated." But the disruptions had bought the humans precious time. As the Dominion fleet scrambled to regain control, a new blip appeared on their sensors. "General, incoming vessels on the long-range scanner," an officer reported. "Human reinforcements," Vesker muttered darkly. The 12th Fleet arrived like a thunderstorm, emerging from hyperspace in a dazzling array of light. These weren't retrofitted freighters or hastily assembled strike groups. These were Earth's premier warships, bristling with advanced weaponry and cutting-edge defenses. At the head of the fleet was the U.S. Resolute, a massive carrier armed with squadrons of fighters and bombers. Its commanding officer, Admiral Faulkner, immediately hailed the colony. "Captain Locke, this is Admiral Faulkner. Nice to see you've been keeping the party going." Locke allowed himself a rare grin. "Admiral, you have no idea. Targeting data is already being relayed to your ships." "Understood. Let's turn the tide." The human fleet moved with precision and purpose, engaging the Dominion ships in a ferocious battle. Fighters swarmed through the parallax formations, using hit-and-run tactics to exploit gaps in their defenses. Capital ships unleashed devastating volleys of kinetic and energy-based weapons, forcing the Dominion fleet to divide its attention. On the surface, Locke's forces cheered as the skies lit up with the glow of battle, but Locke himself remained focused. "This isn't over yet," he muttered. Vesker watched the battle unfold, his confidence waning with each passing moment. The humans' reinforcements were formidable, their tactics unpredictable. "General, we're losing ships faster than we can reposition," Zorlin warned. Vesker bared his teeth. "Order the fleet to withdraw to the outer system. We'll regroup and launch a counteroffensive." "But sir..." "Do it," Vesker snapped. The Dominion fleet began a hasty retreat, their ships vanishing into hyperspace one by one. The humans didn't pursue, they had already achieved their objective. As the last parallax ship disappeared, a cheer erupted among the human defenders. The colony, though battered and scarred, had survived. On the Resolute, Locke stood before a holographic map of the battlefield, debriefing with Admiral Faulkner. "They'll be back," Locke said, his tone grim. "And next time, they'll be prepared for our tricks." Faulkner nodded. "True. But now we've shown them what we're capable of. We've proven that humanity doesn't back down." Locke allowed himself a small smile. "Let's hope they remember that." On his flagship, Vesker seethed. The humans had humiliated him, exposing flaws in the Dominion's tactics and technology. But more than that, they had shattered his perception of what a primitive species was capable of. General Zorlin said quietly, "We must reassess our strategy. These humans, they're not like any enemy we've faced." Vesker didn't respond. His pride wouldn't let him admit it, but deep down he knew Zorlin was right. Weeks passed, and the galaxy buzzed with the fallout of humanity's improbable victory at the colony of Brelton IV. Across countless star systems, the alien powers debated, speculated, and whispered in tones ranging from disbelief to grudging respect. The Parallax Dominion, though bruised, was far from defeated, and General Vesker's humiliation had only fueled his determination to crush humanity once and for all. On board the Dominion flagship Ravenous Will, Vesker convened his war council. His slit-pupilled eyes scanned the room, narrowing at the sight of his subordinates' uneasy postures. "Speak," Vesker growled. Zorlin, ever the diplomat, stepped forward. "General, we've analyzed the humans' tactics extensively. Their ability to adapt and their willingness to endure extreme losses are unlike anything we've faced. They weaponize their resourcefulness." And Vesker demanded. Zorlin hesitated. "And traditional strategies will not suffice. To defeat them, we must abandon convention and embrace their unpredictability." The room fell silent. Vesker's claws clicked against the table as he considered Zorlin's words. Finally, he let out a low snarl. "Prepare the fleet. We will strike at Earth itself. If their colonies can defy us, we will crush the heart of their resistance. And this time, we will not underestimate them." On Earth, the United Earth Command was already preparing for the worst. Reports of the Dominion's regrouping efforts had reached Admiral Faulkner, who now presided over an emergency meeting at UEC headquarters. "We've bought ourselves time," Faulkner began, addressing a room of senior officers, including Captain Locke. "But it's clear the Dominion won't stop until they've broken us. We must assume Earth is their next target." Locke, his uniform still bearing the scars of Brelton IV, leaned forward. "Then we need to make Earth their biggest mistake." Faulkner nodded. "Agreed. But how? We can't rely on the same tricks. They'll be ready for EMPs, guerrilla tactics, and improvised weaponry." Locke's eyes gleamed with determination. "Then we don't just defend Earth. We turn it into a battlefield they can't escape from." As the Dominion fleet approached Earth, they found the planet bristling with defenses. Massive orbital platforms encircled the planet, each armed with kinetic railguns and advanced missile systems. Swarms of drones patrolled the skies, while on the surface, human forces prepared for an all-out assault. But the humans hadn't stopped there. Locke's strategy was bold and unconventional, even by human standards. The planet's civilian infrastructure had been repurposed for war. Cities were fortified, power grids rerouted to create energy traps, and even Earth's weather control satellites were modified to disrupt the Dominion's sensors with artificial storms. "Begin the assault," Vesker ordered from the ravenous will. The Dominion ships surged forward, unleashing a torrent of plasma fire. The orbital platforms retaliated in kind, their railguns shredding the first wave of Parallax frigates. Fighters from both sides filled the void, engaging in deadly dogfights. On the ground, Locke commanded the planetary defenses with unwavering focus. Activate the seismic charges, he ordered. Deep below Earth's surface, a network of charges detonated, sending shock waves through the planet's crust. The resulting tremors disrupted the Dominion's landing operations, toppling their walkers and scattering their ground forces. "Sir, their infantry is advancing," a lieutenant reported. "Good," Locke said. "Lead them into the traps." The Dominion's ground forces, though highly trained and equipped with advanced technology, found themselves ensnared in a web of human ingenuity. Streets turned into minefields, buildings into sniper nests. Even Earth's rivers and forests became death traps, filled with concealed explosives and camouflaged units. General Zorlin reported from the ravenous will, "The humans have fortified every inch of this planet. Our forces are taking heavy casualties." Vesker's eyes burned with fury. "Then we escalate. Deploy the subatomic destabilizers." The destabilizers, experimental weapons capable of disintegrating matter at the molecular level, were unleashed on Earth. Entire districts were reduced to ash in seconds. But even in the face of such destruction, the humans adapted. They used the Dominion's own devastation against them, luring their forces into areas weakened by the destabilizers and collapsing structures onto them. "They're turning our weapons into traps," Zorlin murmured, awe creeping into his voice. As the battle raged, a daring plan unfolded in orbit. Locke had ordered a covert strike team to infiltrate the ravenous will. Using modified Dominion shuttles, the team slipped past the fleet's defenses and docked with the flagship. Inside the ravenous will, the strike team composed of Earth's best special forces moved with precision. Their mission: disable the flagship's command systems and cripple the Dominion fleet. Vesker, alerted to the breach, growled in frustration. "Repel the intruders. Do not let them sabotage this ship." But the humans were relentless. They fought their way to the control center, using a combination of brute force and clever tactics. One soldier even reprogrammed a Dominion maintenance drone to create a diversion, allowing the team to breach the final defenses. Locke himself led the assault, his determination unwavering. As he stormed into the control center, he locked eyes with Vesker. "You," Vesker snarled. "You're the one who humiliated us on Brelton IV." Locke smirked. "And here I am again." The two adversaries clashed, Vesker's raw strength against Locke's speed and resourcefulness. The fight was brutal, but Locke's team managed to disable the flagship's control systems, sending the Dominion fleet into disarray. With their flagship crippled and their forces in retreat, the Dominion had no choice but to withdraw. Earth had survived. In the aftermath, Locke stood with Admiral Faulkner on a balcony, overlooking the battered but resilient planet. "They'll be back," Faulkner said quietly. "They might," Locke replied. "But now they know. Humanity isn't just another species to conquer. We're a force to be reckoned with." Faulkner smiled faintly. "And if they come again?" Locke's gaze hardened. "We'll be ready." On board the ravenous will, Vesker sat in silence, his pride shattered. He had mocked humanity, dismissed their tactics as primitive and chaotic, but now he understood. "They're not primitives," Vesker said to Zorlin. "They're survivors, and that makes them more dangerous than any species we've ever faced." Zorlin nodded. "What do we do now, General?" Vesker's claws tapped against the armrest of his chair. we prepare. And we pray that we never have to face them again.